There we go. All right. So if we could start by you sharing your name, your pronouns, and your title or position, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, so my name is Shawn Khalifa. It is he and his are my pronouns. Um, my position at Project Rebound is as a student ambassador. I'm just a student employee with Project Rebound.
Could you share a
Not
little
just, I'm actually
about
amazing.
Oh, I'm sorry?
I sound not just a student, like I'm actually an amazing student ambassador. Like
Absolutely.
downplay what we do here.
Don't downplay your role.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and fix this for your next question because it's only appropriate. There we go.
Oh,
Represent
there
properly.
you go. All right. So could you please tell us about your resource center, Project Rebound, and why it exists?
Yeah, so we have a population of students that were affected by the criminal justice system. They were incarcerated themselves. We're currently not serving the system impacted students, which would be ones that had family members who are incarcerated. So our population is directly impacted by the criminal justice system, which means they suffer a lot more consequences of what they experienced in their past, such as disenfranchisement, trouble getting certain resources, or even having people listen to them, because when somebody reviews their background and sees that red flag, they normally don't further the conversation. So what we do is, as an understanding peer group, and for our official faculty as understanding staff and professors, they come in and they're able to overlook that initial bias and give you opportunity to get some of the same resources as your peers who weren't system impacted would have. That's why we exist, for that reason.
Thank you.
No problem.
Could you tell us about your own restorative justice journey and how you became interested in this work?
Yeah, so mine was pretty intense because I was born in 1988. The Rodney King disturbances happened in my neighborhood in 1992. So I was just a baby, but that event prompted my mom to flee because I'm Egyptian and white. So I had my father was in prison. My father's been deported 3 times and was in prison over 12 times for burglaries. So that initially at the beginning of my life, I was system impacted by the immigration system and the criminal justice system. And my community was a victim of police instigated violence, which led for my family to flee the community and try to move to a safer neighborhood in Riverside County. But what happened was that followed us, and a gang formed in my neighborhood when I was young. And I started affiliating with that gang, hanging out with them. I didn't progress to the level of criminality to where I was myself causing harm to others. I was causing harm by stealing. I became a thief. I would steal from local stores. I was doing drugs. I was heavily into marijuana. I did meth, PCP, which is Sherm, tried cocaine, and I affiliated with the gang members. So that exposed me to different levels of violence in the community. And one day, one of my neighbors committed a burglary of a homeowner, and I was 15 years old, and they were all older than me. But when they went to commit their burglary, they attacked the homeowner and they beat him, and he passed away. When I showed up to the house, they pulled me into the house by my shirt and forced me into the crime, basically. The 18-year-old grabbed me, yanked me in the house. He started yelling at me like, is this what you want to be a part of? And I didn't sign up to do a home invasion or hurt a homeowner. What I was familiar with was burglaries where nobody was home, stealing from stores. And if somebody did come in contact with me, I'd run away. I was 5'7", 120 pounds, high on meth all the time. But because I was at this house, under the law in California, I was responsible for first-degree murder. There was a law called the felony murder rule. So I was arrested shortly after that crime occurred and charged with first-degree murder. I was prosecuted as an adult, even though I was barely 15 years old. They sent my case to adult court because that was the law at the time. So I was sentenced to life in prison. And I spent a total of 16 years in prison before California changed the law that will no longer incarcerate you for a murder you didn't commit. Once that happened, I was allowed to come home. And that's where my passion grew for restorative justice and getting involved in criminal justice reform, because I experienced it personally at an unbalanced rate. You know, I was victimized I was basically survived and punished the day that my crime occurred. I take responsibility for getting involved, but I never took responsibility for causing physical harm and being responsible for murder. So my life sentence, even though I accepted it and I did really well in prison and I went to school and educated myself, I still was disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system. So my passion only grew. I got into Southwestern College in San Diego County in Chula Vista, and I started thriving. I earned half of my degree with a 4.0 while incarcerated at our local state prison in San Diego, which is, the name is RJ Donovan Correctional Facility. And ever since my release, I've been advocating. And when I eventually was able to transfer into San Diego State, Project Rebound was the ideal choice and fit for my advocacy and my continued exploration of exploring what's wrong in our criminal justice system that leads to poor outcomes versus our desired outcomes of getting rid of victims. And I also worked with Project Rebound while I was incarcerated. They go into the prisons. So I met Project Rebound from San Diego State and criminal justice students from San Diego State while I was incarcerated, which also further developed my relationship with Project Rebound and only expanded my interest in working here in the field in general of criminal justice reform.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you seen a shift in institutional support for restorative justice work? And if so, what do you think prompted that change?
So social media, having a younger generation that's able to hear about cases more direct that aren't censored from the top down, from the media down to the public, even though in a way they're starting to be censored more and more now. And you would have to argue maybe that was the intention then, that they wanted to give a little bit. But in my experience, since I entered the criminal justice system in 2004, is that there's an ebb and a flow to support and then retracted support. So you'll go a period of 5 to 10 years where you have immense support for criminal justice reform, because all through the 70s and the 80s, you had the same wave, and you had people convicted of first-degree murder be released under our governor, Jerry Brown. And this was a wave that the opposition, the people that promote tougher penalties and being strict and eliminating this population from society and from being able to function in our community, that advocacy group pushed back and got laws passed like the felony murder rule law, the 3 strikes law, direct filing of juveniles to adult court. And what this did was increase our prison population, but it failed to reduce crime. It failed to keep victims of crime from happening. So both policies were not that effective. Just releasing people from prison is not effective, but just incarcerating people is not effective. So I think now the further we go in this ebb and flow, we learn new ways, such as restorative justice, which is a new popular term, of applying it to our criminal justice system. So currently, we're trying to find a way to make a real effect on our desired goal. We had to figure out what our goal was. Was it to harm people who committed crime and create a deterrent? And what we found is that deterrents do not work. The death penalties never deterred anybody from killing anybody, and charging juveniles as adult never deterred a juvenile from committing adult felonies. So once we started noticing these deterrents didn't work, we started looking at what would work. We also noticed that just letting people out into the community with no resources doesn't work. So we need to start looking at how do we give them more support. And that's why restorative justice fills that void in a way, because it allows us to address the victim of a crime, to identify who was harmed, because under the prior system, even our current system, the state is offended when something happens. You break a law, and that law applies to what the legislators set out. And this is offense to the state and the people of California. This isn't an offense to a victim. This isn't an offense to a Jane Doe or a Jane. And in restorative justice, that's who we address. We first acknowledge, okay, Jane Doe was harmed. The state wasn't harmed. Jane was harmed. Let's figure out how to make it better for Jane. So then we go to Jane and we find out Jane's needs and support. Does Jane need property replaced? Does Jane need a new house? Does Jane need therapy and support? What does Jane need? And then we address the offender. We don't just jump to the state, we go to the offender's needs, because we don't want this crime happening again. And we learn that if we neglect the offender's needs, we just get more crime. We promote more crime, because 95% of the people that pass through our criminal justice system become our neighbors once again. So then we focus on our offenders' needs. And we ask that we don't try to use harm language, because calling an offender a criminal or a felon further disenfranchises them. And those are just harm labels designed by the opposite advocates that promote punitive policies from allowing this population to thrive and be successful. We found that doesn't work. So we try to refer to this population as offenders. And the offender gets an opportunity to acknowledge the harm they caused. You don't just go to the offender and say, we now want to destroy you. We hate you. You are the enemy of society. We see that every day in San Diego District Attorney Summer Stephan's position of crime. She will often go on news media outlets and say, I won't say your name. I hate you. You are so evil. And those are dog whistles for, I want punitive criminal policies in effect. I want this current system to remain. She's just kind of scared of approaching restorative justice. And the only district attorney in California that we've seen getting close was Gascon in Los Angeles County. So yeah, so I've seen the support grow, and you're asking me what prompted the change. I would have to say just an informed young population. So a population like us, college students, understanding what harms are being done, understanding that sending me to prison for life didn't keep another young child from committing murder or being exposed to murder or joining gangs or doing drugs, and that deterrence didn't work. So I think that prompted the change initially. Did that in effect create actual change? I'd hesitate to say so. I would think that we're slowly going back towards the punitive policies. We haven't met our ideal balance yet, so.
I definitely have questions about that, but could you elaborate on harm language in particular? Are there other examples?
Yeah, so inmate is a harm label because correctional officers and even people in the public, when they refer to a population as an inmate, it others them. It makes them seem like they're an other population. And the Germans did it during World War II. They labeled Jews an other population, and then it became easy for the German population to overlook the fact that Jewish people were having their businesses removed from their possession, having their houses removed. All of their possessions were being taken by the German government. And the average German citizen, to not feel so morally bad about it, would just let it be as if they were an other. So the same thing happened in the United States, and in California, we experienced it to a heavy degree with an inmate. We see it in the media, you'll see it. So this is an example of how inmate could be used to harm one of our citizens, like a fellow American. You'll see a label or a caption in the media or on official documents. An inmate attempted to assault officers and he died while officers were trying to restrain him. So that language, inmate, allows the general public to stomach that a convicted murderer, and they say murderer, like he currently kills people, even though he may have accidentally killed somebody once upon a time, or he killed somebody in the heat of passion, but he's no longer a killer. They use those labels, murderer, inmate, so that the population can stomach the outcome that this person died. And it's not, they won't investigate it. You won't say, well, what actually happened? And in my experience from eyewitness accounts, officers will provoke somebody who they read on their paperwork as a murderer, cop, killer, sex offender. They'll provoke them. They will call them derogatory terms, such as, you're just an inmate. Nobody cares about you. You're worthless. They'll provoke them into being angry. And when that anger, when your offender, your resident of the institution, resident is another word we try to use to remove the harm stigma and labels. The officer a lot of times will attack that individual and just suggest in their paperwork that, and they'll use harm labels in their paperwork to suggest that this person attacked them, and that justifies their homicide of that individual. So that is where harm labels to the extreme hurts. On the more, that's a individual macro level, but micro levels that will keep you from gaining employment is, for instance, felon. So the term felon in popular society, like overall society, designates somebody that can't be trusted, somebody that's done harm in the past and they may do harm again, a convicted felon, convicted robber, a convicted murderer, all harm labels. Trying to think of more for you, but I think I covered the basic general ones to give people an idea what harm labels are.
My understanding is that harm labels are dehumanizing, essentially.
They are, yes. Yeah, and you see it in other populations because you have, you can have your LGBT community, and people have used words that they may have been the definition before for, they would call somebody gay or homosexual, but those words have been used to harm because people have taken those words and used it to justify their harm and created a schema in people's heads that these words make it easier to not feel sympathy for that population when I refer to them as such. So that's why their population has worked to remove harm labels from them. And we do the same in criminal justice reform. We try to remove the labels that make it easy for schemas to kick in and allow the broader society to co-sign harming individuals.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep.
How do you believe the institution has utilized your work in transformative justice or restorative justice?
And the institution we're referring to is San Diego State University.
Yes.
Okay, so currently they utilize it by allowing me to speak in criminal justice classes and allowing me to work with my peers. So one of the benefits of my experience is that when my peers have the same experience as me, they either grew up around gangs, drugs, and disenfranchised communities, or in the criminal justice system itself, it allows them to have somebody who understands what that feels like personally and to offer them an empathetic ear, to encourage them not to give up, that there's hope, and also educate them, because a lot of my peers aren't familiar with criminal justice reform. They may have not have reached the pinnacle of being in prison. And prison is your university of jails. Like jail is different from prison. Juvenile hall is different from jail and prison. There's different levels. So somebody in jail is not necessarily informed the way somebody who's been to prison for decades is on criminal justice reform. So that I get to become an educator of my peers, an ally of my peers, and also work with faculty and staff who are able to invite me in to speak to non-system impacted students that are able to, like our future law enforcement officers, future correctional officers that want to learn from somebody on the other side who experienced it, who could help them understand how their actions are going to affect somebody in my position or my shoes.
What do you feel the future of transformative justice looks like on campus, and what do you want it to look like?
So I think transformative justice on campus will help us get away from punitive policies. Sometimes you notice professors focus on cheating. They focus on like assuming the worst from students. I've had professors go into class and on the first day educate us on how to wear a mask properly, although nobody violated that policy. And the way they did it was pretty insensitive. They're really demanding, and they say, you need to be in my class. The policy is you need to have your mask above your nose, under your chin. No one's violated this policy yet. And the teacher has a preconceived notion of you need to follow this order or else. And the way that demeanor comes across is that you have a punitive understanding of your interaction with students. You're othering us. You see yourself as higher and us as lower. But I see transformative justice assisting professors as well, to where they could come in and have a more relaxed nature. And even though there's an obvious power dynamic that us as students recognize that you're in a position of authority above me, you don't have to exhibit that behavior. You don't have to come across as you're bigger than me. You're a professor and I'm a student and you have authority over me. You could come across as my peer while we still have that respect level that you're my teacher and I'm going to listen to you. Because one of the best things is to respect somebody based off of an understanding versus fear, because there's a fear-based approach. And I think a professor who takes the approach that you will not cheat or else, or you will follow my rules or else there will be discipline, is an unhealthy approach, because that others the population, your student population, versus coming in and saying, we don't want you to cheat. And if you do cheat, let's find out the root cause of why you cheated. Let's find out, are you overworked? Do you have 2 jobs and 2 kids and you can't afford your rent, so you're working extra hours and you don't have time to study? If that's the reason why you cheated, let's connect you with a counselor who can help you find resources or even mental health support or anything that can structure your study habits to where you won't have the need to cheat. But if the professor took the approach and said, you cheated, I'm writing this up, you're getting a bad grade, I don't want to talk to you, you're a bad student, that's not healthy for our institution as a whole, because you don't know what that's going to do to that bad student. And you just had an amazing impact in their life. You can either have a positive impact or a negative impact. So I think that's the future of transformative justice on campus, is growing it from just the criminal justice system experience to a student-teacher experience, and an institutionalized approach to justice on campus as a whole.
I will have a follow-up question about that. I want to make sure I get the other ones.
Yeah.
How do you apply transformative justice to your work?
One of the things I try to do is practice unconditional positive regard and not judge anybody else. So I try not to judge law enforcement. Whenever there's a police officer on campus, I don't other them. So naturally, my instinct might be to other them and say they're the ones who've caused all this mess, but they're not, because they're not the policymakers who put this legislation in place. Our legislators are the ones who've carefully thought out cause and effect. They've carefully thought out what laws will have an effect on the population and upon me directly. So law enforcement are bound by these same legislative decisions. And when law enforcement goes to do their job every day, they're not setting out with the idea that they're going to be punitive and harm a population. They set out with the idea that they're going to uphold the laws that legislators put out for them. So if these laws by nature are punitive, it's not the officer themselves, it's the policies that are in place. And I respect that because it's not the officer again. So that's how I apply it in my personal life, is to practice unconditional positive regard and try not to judge or other the people that have a different viewpoint as me, or different objectives or an idea of fairness and equality as me. And also let that fuel my advocacy and know what population I need to reach. When I have an issue with the homeless policy, for instance, when you don't want the homeless to sit on a bench and you say that they're loitering at San Diego State and you can't be on campus unless you're a student, I take offense to that. But if I go to the chief of police or the mayor, you don't get anywhere. You need to go legislatively to your city council member. You need to look through what existing penal codes and laws allows law enforcement to go out and enforce those type of rules. You need to look at that legislation. And if I care passionately enough, I need to revise that legislation and submit it to my legislator on good legal standing and grounds, to where that's not a policy and to where there's legal protections for the unhoused. Because homeless is have became another harm word, to where now we'll say unsheltered or unhoused. And we deal with that at San Diego State University because we have a large unhoused population who are our neighbors. They're just like us. They're no different from us. We could be unhoused. My father was unhoused. I've been on the risk of being unhoused numerous times. So that's that in a nutshell.
Thank you. The last planned question is, what kind of background do you think would suit work in transformative justice, and what is your background?
Well, I think the best background to suit transformative justice is somebody who's studied unconditional positive regard, who studies psychology, sociology, who understands the larger factors at play and is able to so psychologists are usually well suited for this work, or social workers, because they can remove themselves from being offended. So they're able to balance out emotional and rational decision. They're able to utilize some of the treatments they use for patients within themselves in their own ration. So for instance, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, they could balance out the rational and logical when working with a patient, or even when working with a society in general. Because if their boss tells them they can't, for instance, sit on a bench and counsel an unhoused person on campus, or get involved when law enforcement is pressing them because it's not ethical, or it's outside of their job description, they can balance out the ration behind it, that on a system-wide level, they may be the difference, in this person's life and anybody's life. It's just, I think that background is better suited for this kind of work than anybody else. Somebody that's been in this, come here, Aqua, come here. Sorry, but yeah, even myself, I don't have the best background for this work because I'm going to have an initial bias that I've been offended by the criminal justice system. So I have to therefore utilize psychological and social strategies and understanding. I have to understand societal structures and factors that lead to everything so that I don't have these biases. Only at that point would I be good for this type of work.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Your responses have been very honest, transparent, and enlightening in a lot of ways. I did have a couple of follow-up questions, but I do want to be mindful of your time. I know it's 9 a.m. Are you okay for me to ask maybe 2 or 3 more questions?
Yes, that is fine.
Perfect. So when you were describing what you felt transformative justice looks like on campus, I was also interested in what you feel transformative justice might look like off campus and within, I hesitate to call it the justice system, but we'll call it that for now. What do you think it looks like off campus and within that system, and how could it look like? How could we get there?
You're saying how does it look off campus, and then how could we make it better on campus?
How does transformative justice look? How does transformative justice look like off campus? Ideally, what would it take to get there? And how does it look like in the justice system? How could we get there?
Oh, I got it. So yeah, so differentiating between the criminal justice system and just transformative justice and society
Yes.
as a whole.
Does that make sense?
Thinking about, yeah, it's just my expertise is in the criminal justice system. So it's hard to disconnect the two. I see them pretty much as one and the same because there's a pipeline that leads to the other. But transformative justice in society as a whole, like in a broader context, involves a lot of understanding understanding what our motivations are for what we do. So popular media, a lot of times, a lot of us watch the news, a lot of us are on social media. If we're getting a lot of our education from the news and social media about how to respond to situations, because this morning I woke up to 3 sensationalized, of course, this is criminal justice, but I think it ties into transformative justice in the broader community. And they're using harm labels to describe people who've committed offenses. And you see the general public in an uproar doing protests up in North County right now about somebody moving into their neighborhood who they don't even know, who's never even affected their family and actually hurting somebody. I seen the jury today send somebody to death. So this jury's just committed murder. Under that law of felony murder that incarcerated me for life, under that law, they've just committed first-degree murder if you were to apply that to them. So seeing this in our society, it's hard for me to disconnect the two. I don't understand transformative justice in the community without tying it into the criminal justice system. That's like beyond my scope of understanding. So I would feel like I would be breaching my understanding of transformative justice in the community if I didn't tie it in the criminal justice system. So it would be hard for me. I wouldn't want to speak about that and mislead anybody or not speak from a position I couldn't defend. I was attempting to, but then when I realized that I don't understand it, yeah, I couldn't.
Thank you. This is exactly why you're an amazing student ambassador.
Thank you.
My last question is not necessarily related to what we've just talked about. It's just what I remember you mentioning earlier. If you were a toy in Andy's room, what toy would you be?
I want to fly, so I want to be Buzz Lightyear to infinity and beyond. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And beyond.
And beyond.
Yeah, that's the way. Will your whole class be viewing this? Or just your professor?
This will be within my professor. What is it? So we're doing.
Shout out to your professor.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, A+. I know you don't give pluses, but definitely 100% on this.
Thank you. So I actually started my master's program in student affairs, and we're focusing on different functional areas. And we wanted to focus on transformative justice and restorative justice because more of that work is being done through institutions. And I think that there's so many ways that these concepts and frameworks can be applied to the work that we're doing. And the way that we want institutions to really function, and everything that you were sharing about how professors especially will treat students, I feel like that can also apply to how we can treat each other on campus, how we handle conduct, and how we handle very difficult conversations, especially regarding the current climate. So I think that there's so many ways that this is important and can be applied to the work. And so I really, really appreciate you taking the time not only to share your experiences and your story, but to also just give your thoughts. I think they're all really, really important. And I'm very excited to also visit the space. I spoke with Davil earlier, and we're working on something so I can come and visit your physical space. I'm excited to do so.
Awesome. I'm usually in there Monday afternoons, but it's usually staffed 5 days a week.
Yeah,
So
I'm.
we'd love to see you come through and bring your friends.
Yeah, would love to do so. Thank you so much.
And your professor.
Um,
Invite your professor. Yeah, no worries.
yeah, I'm sure she'd be happy to visit if she hasn't already. And I'm also new
Yeah,
to the area, so if you have any recommendations for anything
awesome.
about San Diego, let me
No
know.
problem. And if possible, because I am working on a new book, and I think a lot of what I said could help when I promote it. Is it possible to have a copy of this recording?
Yeah, once this
Okay.
loads, I can actually,
Yeah.
would you prefer both the video and the audio?
Yeah, the video and audio would be cool.
Yeah, of course. I'll send that
Would
over.
you mind being on YouTube if I posted it on YouTube?
Oh, no, we're
No?
fine. Thank you.
Hopefully we both get famous, yeah, and we'll get jobs out of this. We did a great research job at UCSD. Sorry, San Diego State, but UCSD has the beach. No, just like we
Oh,
do
I
too.
also work there too. So
Oh, you do? Oh,
yeah,
shout
I
out.
work at
Yeah.
UCSD and CSU San Marcos.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful. Oh, that's lit.
yeah, going bouncing between a bunch of different campuses.
Oh
Um,
no, that's
but
cool.
I
I love
thank
all of
you.
them. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you have any other questions for me at the moment?
no, just was Andy gonna take you guys out to play with you, or are you guys just chilling?
Um, you should.
He said, yeah. All right, bye. It's been nice meeting you. See you
Likewise,
later.
you take
Thank you for
care.
everything. Bye.
Um,